For many are called, but few are chosen. To quote Charles Spurgeon, if you could have chosen your own circumstances and conditions in life, you could not have made so wise a choice as God has made for you. Just imagine if we were granted the authority to choose our circumstances and conditions in life. We could erase the experience of devastating heartbreak, but we would also eliminate an experience of divine healing from God. We might avoid some adverse circumstances, but what happens to the gifts that God placed within us to win these battles? Even if we chose the path for our life, it doesn't come anywhere close to the plan that God has for us. Sometimes we'll find ourselves hesitant about the calling on our lives simply because of the circumstances that are connected to it. I would like to speak tonight with this thought in mind. Accept the call. Accept the call. Now, the book of Matthew captures Jesus sharing a few different parables. The parable of the two sons, the parable of the evil farmers, and the parable that I want to reference tonight, the parable of the great feast. A parable can be defined as a simple story that is used to illustrate a moral or spiritual lesson as told by Jesus in the Gospels. Jesus starts this spiritual story by stating the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a king who prepared a great wedding feast for his son. When the preparation of this feast was completed, the king sent his servants to notify those who received an invitation to this elaborate dinner, but the servants denied this request. He selects another group of servants to tell the invited guests the following: everything is on the table, the prime rib is ready for carving, come to the feast. These servants also denied the king's request. Listen to how the message captures this. They only shrugged their shoulders and went off. One to weed his garden, another to work in his shop. I want to suggest that this parable could be an illustration how some approach the calling on their lives. God has ordered every one of our steps to complete the calling on our lives, but when the figurative phone rings, we still don't accept the call, or we answer it with hesitation. As the Passion Translation captures tonight's focal text, for everyone is invited to enter in, but few respond in excellence. I want to suggest that each of us have a calling on our lives, but only a few respond to it with excellence. So when it comes to being called or being chosen, being called is an invitation from God, and being chosen is our response to it. Here's the single point that I want to lift tonight. God called you to choose you. God called you to choose you. God wouldn't call you if he didn't have a plan to choose you. God wouldn't call you if he didn't have a divine plan to use you. If God called you, he called you intentionally. He didn't pocket dial you. He didn't call you by accident. He called you intentionally. God knows when he's going to call you and exactly what he's calling you to. Genesis 1 verses 26 and 27 remind us that God created each of us in his image. Not only did he create you in his image, he created you to complete the calling assigned to your life. Now, I am aware that we find ourselves in a pandemic. Here's my advice to you. Don't let a pandemic pause God's purpose for your life. Don't let this pandemic make you question his timing or what he placed inside of you. Scripture reminds us that God designed every detail of our life, and that means that his plan included a pandemic. When he designed us in his image, he placed everything inside of us to operate even in the middle of a pandemic. This is why we have to accept the call. We possess everything that we need to conquer every obstacle in front of us. Prior to the restart of the NBA season, some of the players had some reserve about resuming the season. Some felt that in the midst of a pandemic, playing basketball would impact the momentum towards ending the other pandemic known as police brutality. Although some of the players decided to opt out, most of the players traveled to Orlando to resume and conclude the NBA season. I would suggest that the players committed to completing the upcoming season realized that they could advocate for Black Lives Matter while accepting their call to play basketball. This is one of the things that I want to emphasize tonight. Even in the midst of a pandemic, police brutality, in a world that racism is alive and well, God has still equipped us to complete the calling on our lives. This is the reason that essential workers can be exposed to COVID-19 and not contract it. This is why Psalms 91 verses 9 and 10 remind us of the following. When we live our lives within the shadow of God Most High, our secret hiding place, we will always be shielded from harm. How then could evil prevail against us or disease infect us? If God is for you, who can be against you? Weapons may form, but we know they never prosper. Similar to what the king said about the meal prepared in the parable told by Jesus, everything is ready. Everything has been prepared for you to pursue the purpose that God has assigned to you. There is no reason to decline the call on your life when God designed an entire plan for you to complete it. Now, I've heard some interpret tonight's focal text as more of a question instead of a decision. Some suggest, well, I don't know if I'm called or if I'm chosen. We have to remember that being called is God's responsibility, but being chosen is our response to the call. We have to remember that being called is God's responsibility, but being chosen is our response to the call. When God calls you, are you going to decline the call or will you accept it? We can no longer let our circumstances determine our commitment to what we have been called to. I'll close tonight's message with this. Not only does God know what he's called you to, he also knows how many times to call you to it. I don't know if it's just me, but I'm grateful that we serve a God that's always willing to make one more call. I'm grateful that we serve a God that's always willing to make one more call, because he realizes the significance of what he has called us to. Now, God may be willing to make a figurative redial, but at some point, we have to respond with excellence.